Greetings everyone, welcome to video number 18, part 1 of 2 in the project management series presented by Process Geekoid. Today's agenda will be reviewing the PMBOK process table, as well as the 15th process, which is sequence activities process. This process occurs at the intersection of the time knowledge area and the planning process group. In this two-part video for sequence activities, I'm going to cover the ITTOs and a general idea of what sequence activities entails in this part 1. As always, please subscribe, like, and comment. So let's move forward. After defining activities, the next step is to determine the sequence and relationship of the activities to take place for the team to deliver the product, service, or result. The key benefit of this process is it defines the logical sequence of work to obtain greatest efficiency given all project constraints. So we need to make sure that we are taking into consideration the constraints of risks and assumptions. As we have learned in the defined scope process, we need to take that scope statement and incorporate that, as well as the WBS and the scope baseline as a whole, and make sure that we incorporate that in sequencing the activities, so we are aware as to where we are in the project schedule. So these constraints have to be clearly detailed in the sequencing activities process. Now for the ITTOs, inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs for sequence activities process are shown here. For input, we have schedule management plan. This is coming from plan schedule management. Activity list, which is coming as an output of defined activities. Activity attributes, which is also an output of defined activities. Milestone list, similarly, is an output of defined activities. Project scope statement is coming from output of defined scope. Remember, it consists of the risks, assumptions, constraints, and major deliverables, what we're trying to deliver for this project. EEFs, factors that are not in the control of the project team but influence and constrain or direct a project. OPAs, formal, informal, internal policies and procedures, lessons learned, and how to sequence the activities based on previous project experience. And also this could include schedule network diagram templates. Next, for tools and techniques, we have precedence diagramming method, PDM. It is also known as activity on node. So the precedence diagramming method is a technique used for constructing a schedule model, and it is also where activities are represented by nodes and are graphically linked by one or more logical relationships. It shows the sequence in which the activities are to be performed. Also, PDM is also known as activity on node, or AON. It is the most common approach to network diagram and is the most frequently tested on the PMP exam. Also, the PDM has a predecessor activity. It is an activity that logically comes before a dependent activity in a schedule. A successor activity is a dependent activity that logically comes after another activity in a schedule. Also, we need to talk about the dependency determinations. This could be in the form of discretionary, internal, mandatory, or external dependencies, and then leads and lags as tools and techniques. Also, in tools and techniques for precedence diagramming method, we have 4 types of relationships: finish to start, finish to finish, start to finish, and start to start. We will discuss these further in a future slide coming up. And also, the key benefit of this process is that it identifies and defines the logical sequence of work to obtain the greatest efficiency given all project constraints. The outputs are going to be the project schedule network diagram and project document updates. We'll be going over the project schedule network diagram in the next video, part 2 of the series, and it will give a more clear picture as to what we're doing. But project schedule network diagram is a graphical representation of the dependencies among the project schedule activities. It is a summary narrative and can accompany the diagram and describe the basic approach used to sequence the activities. For project document updates, we are updating activity lists, activity attributes, milestone list, and risk register. Now for types of dependencies, we have mandatory or discretionary, internal or external. As an example, you could have a mandatory external dependency. The project team determines the classification of all dependencies. So, for example, a mandatory dependency, you could have internal or external. External dependency could be from a legal standpoint, or an internal dependency is coming from the company that you work in. So mandatory dependencies, these are legally or contractually required or inherent in the nature of the work. Mandatory dependencies often involve physical limitation, such as a construction project where it is impossible to erect the superstructure until after the foundation has been built, or an electronics project where a prototype has to be built before it can be tested. So that is an example of a mandatory external dependency. And internal dependency, as in the case of the electronics project. Discretionary dependency, same thing. We're going to have internal and external discretionary dependencies. Most of this is going to be internally driven. And a discretionary dependency is also known as preferred logic or soft logic. These are established based on knowledge of best practices within a particular application area, or some unusual aspect of the project where a specific sequence is desired, even though there may be other acceptable sequences. When fast-tracking techniques are employed, these discretionary dependencies should be reviewed and considered for modification or removal. Fast-tracking technique is a tool or technique to control the schedule. That's going to be discussed in a future video when we get to that. External dependencies involve a relationship between project activities and non-project activities. These dependencies are usually outside the project team's control. For example, testing activity in a software project may be dependent on the delivery of hardware from an external source, or government environmental hearings may need to be held before site preparation can begin on a construction project. So that's an example of a mandatory external dependency. Internal dependencies involve a precedence relationship between project activities and are generally included or inside the project team's control. For example, if the team cannot test a machine until they assemble it, this is an internal mandatory dependency. Moving on, there are two different types of diagramming methods for schedule, and here we have precedence diagramming method, also known as activity on node, and activity on arrow, which is the next type, but here we have precedence diagramming method. The main benefit of precedence diagramming method, PDM, is that it shows the activity dependencies, and it can be an important communication tool for stakeholders. It is a graphical representation technique which shows the interdependencies among various project activities, and is the most common technique on the exam. So this is what we will use to create the critical path, and is also going to be used as part of the PERT, or Program Evaluation Review Technique. It is a type of precedence diagramming method and is the one to focus on for the PMP exam. On the left here you see an example of how a PDM would look like, the PERT diagram, precedence diagramming method. So you have your start node, your end node, and this is activity on node. That's why the name PDM, also known as activity on node. Then we have precedence diagramming method has 4 different types of relationships. And finish to start is where a successor activity cannot start until predecessor activity has finished. This is the most common of these relationships. An example of a finish to start is The award ceremony successor cannot start until the race or predecessor has finished. Finish to finish is where successor activity cannot finish until predecessor activity has finished. An example of this is where writing a document is required to finish before editing the document can finish. Next, we have start to start. Successor activity cannot start until predecessor activity has started. An example of this is leveling concrete is a successor and cannot begin until the foundation has been started. So pouring a concrete. Start to finish, successor activity cannot finish until a predecessor activity has started. This is the least common of these. The first security guard shift or the successor cannot finish until the second security guard shift has started. Moving on, an important concept to cover here is now going to be the next type, and the least common of the diagramming method is activity on arrow. And activity on arrow is used to depict milestones and is not as important for the exam. And it is a special type of PDM or activity on node. The key piece here to understand for the exam is it is going to be a wrong answer choice. And in all activity and on arrow graphs, we will be having dependencies where finish to start and the duration is shown here as arrows. Dummy activities is the key word for an activity on arrow. So dummy activity in arrow diagramming method is an activity inserted to show dependency between activities and does not require work or take time. There is no effort, hence the name dummy activity. So typically, activity on arrow diagram emphasizes milestones or events, and the PDM diagram focuses on tasks. That's the big difference. Also remember, GERT is graphical evaluation review technique is a wrong answer choice that emphasizes looping between activities. This is also a wrong answer choice on the exam. Next, we have leads and lags. Now, in terms of leads and lags, lead is the amount of time where a successor activity can be advanced with respect to a predecessor activity. Lead is often represented as a negative value for lag in a scheduling software. On a project to construct a new office building, the landscaping could be scheduled to start 2 weeks prior to the scheduled punch list completion. This is an example of a lead. You're ahead. The task is ahead. Lag is the amount of time whereby a successor activity will be delayed with respect to a predecessor activity. For example, a technical writing team may begin editing the draft of a large document 15 days after they begin writing it. That's an example of a lag. Moving on, it is important to understand the output of this overall process for sequencing activities. Project schedule network diagram. As a wrap-up, it is a graphical representation of dependencies among the project schedule activities. It is a summary narrative and can accompany the diagram and describe the basic approach to use to sequence the activities. The other output for this process is project document updates. The activity list, activity attributes, and milestone list and risk registers are all updated. So that is the gist of this whole process. We'll be going over the project schedule network diagram in the next video, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment.